us a very great honor and a particular pleasure for me personally to welcome CARYL PHILLIPS here at the University of Salento. CARYL PHILLIPS is an extraordinary writer and refined intellectual, one of the most outstanding and highly acclaimed voices in contemporary literature. CARYL, thanks for accepting our invitation. You're back in Lecce after 23 years, but we've always been following your brilliant career, reading your novels, including them in our syllabus and sharing them with our students. We are all very excited about your presence here and we look forward to your lecture. First of all, let me extend my welcome to the youngest among in this group, a select group of brilliant final year students from Bansi, Ciardo Pellegrino and Siciliani high schools. A warm welcome also to their professors who have kindly accepted to participate by reading and discussing CARYL PHILLIPS novels and works with their students. Welcome, of course, to all the students of the University of Salento and to all my beloved colleagues who are here today. Well, you all know CARYL PHILLIPS, who he is. Behind me on the slide, you'll find a list of his works along with the many rewards and awards he has received. So rather than presenting, and we can do without this slide, so they had a look at it if you want, Antonio, we can do without it. So rather than presenting his long and distinguished career, both as a writer and as an academic, would be impossible in such a short time, I will briefly focus my attention on the significance of his work and on his commitment as an intellectual. In 2003, Time magazine described Phillips as a writer of wrongs, highlighting his concern for all forms of injustice, from the abomination of the slavery system during colonial times up to the present. We are still facing the legacy of that infamous past. His diasporic ethos informs his works and gives voice to the predicament of the outcast, of the downtrodden people, to all those who, in a way or in the other, for different reasons, do not belong or fully belong. And he focuses, as you all know, in particular on the uprooting, the dislocation of migrants, on the constant renegotiation of identities within the diaspora, and the never-ending search for a place to call home. His novels pose to us all as readers a challenge. They question our preconceived views, unsettling our rooted certainties, and they make us interrogate ourselves. He's a true humanist, I put it between inverted commas, as the American Palestinian intellectual Edward Said would have defined him. Today we live in very dark times, unfortunately, marked by crude, gratuitous, unacceptable violence manifesting in the ongoing genocide and massacre of defenseless populations. Dark times characterized by the violation of fundamental rights, the erosion of respect for the other, the manipulation of consent, the distortion of truth through misleading narratives, which are often used as weapons for political propaganda. And also times in which we are getting used to a sloppy, simplified, and approximate use of language, where in these dark times, we need intellectuals like CARYL PHILLIPS who pursue truth, cultivate a spirit of care, and promote dialogue. This is why I would like to thank you again for being here, not only for the beautifully crafted pages of your novels, but for your commitment to intellectual inquiry and social justice. So thank you for opening for us doors and perspectives on realities we might otherwise never come to know. You allow us to cross borders and boundaries together with you. And you encourage us to consider possibilities of how the world can be changed, how to create, to build a better, more compassionate world through a peculiar kind of knowledge. There's mutual understanding. Well, you wrote that literature can represent a bulwark against intolerance, a force for change. Well, your literary works and your literary texts perform this task magnificently. So thanks again for being with us, Kaz. So now I leave the floor to Professor Alessandra Di Maio, who will dialogue with CARYL Phillips. Alessandra Di Maio is Professor of English Literature at the University of Palermo. Her research focuses on post-colonial migration, transnational and diaspora studies, in particular in the field of African studies. Well, tomorrow at 11, she will give a lecture, very interesting and challenging lecture on the Black Mediterranean, and we invite you all to participate. So Alessandra, thanks for being here. It's for me a very great joy. So I'll...
Thank you. Thank you. Grazie, grazie Maria Renata, grazie CARYL Phillips, grazie a tutti voi per essere qui. It's a joy and a pleasure, and it's an honor for me to be here in Lecce, in this south to south connection, and to be here with you all, welcoming CARYL Phillips, distinguished writer CARYL Phillips. I would like to begin by asking you if you can all follow us in English very well. Yes? Yeah? Who can? Hands up. Chi ci segue? Bene. Ok, chi non ci segue, they wouldn't raise their hands, non alzerebbero le mani a chi non ci segue. Benissimo. And you know, like we're ready to switch back and forth if you need to, so don't hesitate. You're not? but I can help translate. I'm sure there won't be any need. The younger generation speaks English fluently, but I'm just going to say one thing in Italian. Voglio dire soltanto che, you know what I'm going to say. Voglio dire soltanto che inizieremo con una lettura dal nuovo testo di CARYL Phillips che dà il titolo a questo incontro e si intitola appunto The Invention of Home. Ed è un libro di non fiction, come diciamo anche oramai in italiano, di saggistica, chiamiamolo come vogliamo, in cui l'autore raccoglie e ha scritto proprio per questa occasione alcuni saggi. Il saggio da cui legge oggi è di natura autobiografica ed è un racconto della sua infanzia e della sua giovinezza. I 20 saggi sono tutti legati tra di loro e in questo brano che leggerà oggi da uno dei suoi saggi racconta di quando ha incontrato il padre dopo 10 anni in cui era stato lontano da lui. Negli altri saggi racconta di lui come bambino dato in affidamento, poi adottato. Quindi in questo saggio racconta dell'incontro in Inghilterra col papà una decina d'anni dopo che non si erano visti. D'accordo? E quindi and it's my pleasure to give the floor to CARYL Phillips. Grazie.
All right, thank you.
I just started with your trying to do the practice, so now you say it in English.
Hey, that's great.
Yeah.
I feel less like the rapper. All right, good. Well, thank you. First of all, I want to apologize. According to Alessandra, I speak about 3 words of Italian, so I'm sorry, I'm going to speak in English. I want to say it is 20-something years now since I was last here. Okay, no problem. And it's a great honor and a great privilege to be asked to come back and see some familiar faces and lots of new faces. Actually, 23 years ago, most of you weren't born, right? So you don't remember. um, and thank you to Professor Dolce and Professor Di Maio, who are wonderful friends and hosts. I think that the main thing that we all have in common is that we have parents. You have a mother and you have a father. And at some point, I began to wonder about my parents. And I began to wonder about them, particularly as my mother developed a terrible disease, dementia, and her memory began to fade. And the stories that they had told me about growing up, I realized that most of it was false, was a lie. For instance, I will just say one thing. I had always believed that I came from the Caribbean as a 4-month-old baby in my mother's arms. My mother was 20, from the Caribbean to England. And towards the end of her life, my mother told me that we didn't, that we actually came to Italy, that the first place I arrived in Europe was Genoa, which was a shock to me. So I immediately got on a plane and I went to Genoa to look. And I began to see things there that helped me to better understand who I was. For instance, the island I was born on is called St. Kitts, and Columbus discovered the island in November 1493. And you know where Columbus is from. So outside of the train station in Genoa is a huge statue of Columbus. And I began to see these strange patterns of connections that were all tied up with the falsehoods that my parents had offered me. Now, all parents offer their children falsehoods. It's just part of being a parent. But I think parents who have migrated and left a part of their past behind and out of sight have a deep desire to reinvent themselves in the new country. So all of this is to say, I began to write about the whole question of home and the whole question of belonging. And I'm going to read an essay today, which is one of 20 essays in this book, about meeting my father after about 10, 12 years of not seeing him, because there were some questions I had to ask him as well. So this essay is called Grand Central. And before I read it, I'll just say the epigraph to the book is a poem by an old friend of mine, an English poet called James Fenton. And Fenton's poem, The Ideal, opens with these 4 lines, which became the guiding principle for what became the journey of writing this book. The 4 lines are this: this is where I came from. I passed this way. this should not be shameful or hard to say. Grand Central. For the greater part of his life, my father has been a performer. He's always sought to arrange things so that I, like everybody else, was reduced to being little more than a shadowy presence in the wings looking on at his mercurial stagecraft. However, I always suspected that as he aged, it would one day become evident to him that he lacked the necessary energy to maintain his foolishness. What, I wondered, would he do then? Our estrangement from each other was never officially sanctioned by either party, but at some point in my late teens, I decided that I could no longer be bothered to witness his transparently phony behavior. And then many years later, as I suspected he would, my father attempted to re-establish contact with me. Not only did birthday and Christmas cards start to arrive, but much to my surprise, he also turned up unannounced at a public event where I was being interviewed on stage. It occurred to me that perhaps he now thought that this was the moment where he wanted to stop his clowning and begin to straighten out the narrative of his life. Was it possible, I wondered, that he wished to confess something? Did he want to present a more honest version of himself that I might be able to help support by just being available to listen to him? I couldn't be sure, but after this unexpected encounter, I wrote to my father and I suggested that we meet privately. However, when we did, it quickly became clear to me that he was still wedded to utilizing the evasive shimmy as a communicative strategy. The encounter proved to be a failure. Having survived a childhood that was populated with lies and silences, silence, of course, being simply a higher form of lying, I was deeply trained in the art of skepticism. I was always very much aware of the antics of those who attempted to bamboozle me. My father's mistake, of course, was that he failed to understand this fact. My father simply didn't know me. I met him one September morning at the newly rebuilt Birmingham New Street Station. The modern edifice, which is more of a shopping centre than a train station, styled itself Grand Central. Presumably, the hope was that the station might bask in the reflected glory of New York City's early 20th century masterpiece. As I slung my bag over one shoulder and prepared to ride the escalator up from the platform to the greeting area, it crossed my mind that the city planners and architects had probably never visited New York's Grand Central Terminal. One glimpse at the grandeur of that station on 42nd Street might well have caused them to reconsider their chosen name. I reached the top of the escalator and tripped forward, for rather than watching my feet, I'd been scanning the overhead signs for one which might direct me towards the ticket barriers. I was tired, for I'd flown overnight from New York and then transferred first by train and then by tube from Heathrow to Euston Station. I'd assumed that the subsequent 90-minute journey to Birmingham would be an opportunity for me to sleep, but my mind was teeming with anticipation. I ordered a tall coffee from the woman who was squeezing the narrow trolley down the aisle. I was fascinated by the uniform grey stripes in her hair, which made her neatly trimmed bob look like a barcode. but I averted my eyes and settled back to stare out of the window at the England that had been my father's home since his arrival in the late 1950s. At the top of the escalator, I walked towards a security barrier, put my ticket into the machine, and I watched as the contraption swallowed up my offering. It was then that my father stepped in front of me, nervously grinning and reaching out his long fingers, but clearly uncertain as to whether he should shake my hand or grasp my shoulder, and in the end, he did neither, and the hand hovered and flapped slightly, a strange ebony fish. And I'm the one, he said, who's supposed to be blind, as he bit his bottom lip and arched his eyebrows in the coquettish manner of a child. My youngest son used to affect this same mannerism when making a special plea for something he knew he shouldn't be asking for, and inevitably I would smile and capitulate to whatever the young boy wanted. There was something charming about the way my son used to attempt to seduce me, but my father's larking about was sadly juvenile. I looked at the grinning man as he moved nervously from the ball of one foot to the other. He was seemingly unsure as to whether the formalities were now at an end, and clearly keen to move off and leave behind the splendid new Grand Central. But my mind was made up. We wouldn't be going anywhere. I suggested we find somewhere to have a coffee. He looked momentarily puzzled. He said, "But Cynthia, my partner, she's waiting for us back at the house. She's expecting us." Behind the twinkle of his darting eyes, I could now see a profound unhappiness, which I imagined had not originated in this moment of temporary confusion. My father was losing control over the situation. I had come to him. After many years, I was standing before him, and he couldn't afford to lose me again. I pointed to an escalator and said, "There'll be somewhere up there for us to have coffee." He suddenly seemed fatigued as his languid eyes followed my finger, and then he snapped to attention, and his whole body turned towards me. Finally, he'd made up his mind, and he put his hand onto my shoulder. "You must be tired," he said, "after your journey." He waited, but I said nothing. A thought had descended into my mind. Because he will die, I will die. And because I will die, my children will one day die. Surely we have a duty to offer something to each other beyond mere silence. Dad, I understand. We're migrants. We're desperate to cover our tracks. I understand we're migrants. We're burdened with shame, the source of which often remains hidden. But whatever anxieties we carry, we remain obliged to offer our children something more than a cute overbite and a raised eyebrow. But of course, privately, I knew that there had been a residual benefit to the silence that he'd habitually offered to me. From an early age, I had to learn to rely upon my imagination, and I'd subsequently built something of a life and a career out of constantly journeying in my imagination. But there was something demeaning about having to search for one's own father by rummaging through words. There was something lamentable about the fact that I'd actually become well practiced at doing this. My father and I talked about a lot of things that morning as we sat opposite each other in Grand Central, nursing our cups of coffee. He'd long since retired, or been retired, I couldn't be sure which. What was clear was that he felt that his work had somehow betrayed him, but he exhibited a profound reluctance to linger on any aspect of the past. He was determined to keep our conversation anchored in the present and the superficial. the weather, my train journey, the bitterness of the coffee. Was my coffee hot enough? Growing up, I sensed that what he really wanted to be was a lawyer. The drama, the acclaim, the long, sinewy words, the rich, plummy words, but he hadn't had the opportunity. No, perhaps that's too easy. It's more plausible that he hadn't had the discipline or the talent. But to be fair to him, he viewed his schooling in the Caribbean as somewhat rudimentary. There were no lower slopes to his education, no bottom rung of the ladder on which he might place a foot and begin to climb towards a still indiscernible summit. The corrugated iron roof ceiling was always visible, and as a result, from the beginning, my father had little choice but to fuse a silvery tongue with a sprinkle of charm. He'd spent his whole life compensating for his relative lack of education by offering in its place artfully crafted charisma. Whenever he thought himself in danger of being discovered, he would smile winningly. And on that morning in Birmingham, he smiled at me. But behind the smile, I could see fear. He was running out of time, and so was I. Both of my children were now asking about their grandfather, and although I could continue to pretend, I needed some answers. There's something unsatisfactory about meeting anybody in a train station. People arrive and they leave at a frenzied pace. It's impossible for two people to sit quietly and ignore the cacophony of tannoy announcements. Train stations radiate the static energy of non-communication. My father leaned slightly closer to me as though he'd lost his hearing. He whispered, "You know, I remember that awful town, Withensea. Your mother sent you into care there to be fostered. But I drove from Leeds and I found you in that terrible place. And on the drive back to Leeds, I cried the whole way." I stared directly into his eyes, wondering whether it was even worth telling him that I don't remember him turning up there or anywhere during the difficult years when my brother and I were being shunted from one unsuitable foster home to the next. Furthermore, if he really did drive to Withensea and witness the misery of his children's situation, why did he drive back alone? I saw the first tears squeeze between his long lashes and splash onto his cheek, and only then did I drop my gaze. I stood up, excused myself, and momentarily retreated to the bathroom. After this meeting with him, I returned to the United States and my sons. I had only half answers for them. For the whole duration of the encounter with my father, I worked hard to create the space for him to say more about the past, but he seemed reluctant. While in the bathroom, I thought about this situation, and I finally came to accept the fact that my father was incapable of opening up. I knew nothing about his parents, nor anything about his familial history in the Caribbean. He was committed to both controlling and erasing the past. I returned to the table where I could see that he'd wiped away his tears and was now smiling, but he remained locked in the present tense. Shortly after this visit, my father mailed me a card which had been photoshopped from a wedding day picture of his marriage to my mother. Arranged around the edge of the wedding day photograph were silhouetted images of palm trees and beaches. The card was an exotic offering to me, but stenciled in large letters beneath the photograph were 3 words: pride and prejudice. Was he casting himself as pride and my mother as prejudice? After all, I now knew that given his social background, my mother's family thought very little of him. However, I wondered if it ever occurred to him that despite my mother's family's dismissal of him, that it could equally be himself as prejudice and my mother as pride. Or perhaps he was bestowing both words upon my mother. I propped the wedding day picture up against my computer, where it remained for some weeks. I would stare at it and think about my parents, but my father's stenciled words were only partially helpful as I continued to try and unlock the secret of their marriage. As I contemplated the image of my mother and my father, I tried to kickstart my mind and find the appropriate narrative to complement the photograph, but no matter how hard I tried, words eluded me. One day my eldest son came into my office and he asked me about the card. I told him who these people were, and he stared hard at the image, and then he said, "Grandma is sad." On this most joyous of days, his grandmother did indeed look disturbed. When he left the room, I picked up the card and put it in an envelope and tucked it into a drawer. I was saddened by the fact that my father had never once offered to show me a picture of his parents. In fact, beyond an aunt in New York, my father's youngest sister, I remained woefully ignorant of anything about his roots, as across the years he'd worked diligently to present himself as a man with absolutely no past. Only now am I beginning to understand. Of course, this journey to a new world of England offered him a chance to reinvent himself as something other than a poor country boy with few prospects on a piece of far-flung British colonial property. Soon after my father had begun to speak, it became clear that I shouldn't expect my father to offer me any kind of confessional or consistent master story. Clearly, this was beyond him, as dissembling was in his blood. I had just hoped that he might offer me something, some truthful stories, stories which might help me in my quest to find the correct answers for my sons with regard to both their grandfather and their grandmother. Grandma is sad. Yes, son, your grandma looks sad, but she was occasionally happy. However, my father's reticence meant I still had little to offer them that might help them to better understand their grandfather and his family. Would it be fair to admit to them that I can't remember a single moment when my father exuded any happiness? It saddens me that the man offered me no joy that I might pass on to my own children. Whatever cheerfulness and glee I'm able to offer to them, I had to dig deep and discover it inside of myself. He didn't bequeath to me even the simplest gift of a moment of shared laughter. In fact, I have no photograph that shows the two of us together. I can now see, of course, that a coffee in Grand Central Station in Birmingham, England, wasn't going to persuade him to loosen the noose of mystery around his life. In fact, either of their lives, neither the life of my mother nor that of my father. But in order to discover this, I had to go there. I had to go to Grand Central. I had to turn up. I had to make the journey.
Grazie. Thank you very much for sharing this compelling, moving, rational piece of writing with us. Grazie, CARYL PHILLIPS. See? So this is one of the 3 words in Italian that he knows. Well, I want to go straight to the point. You know, Maria Renata and I have been working on CARYL PHILLIPS, you know, writing novels for quite a few years. And of course, we always think about migration as one of your themes in your non-fictional texts, as well as in your novels and in many other forms that you're engaged with, from radio plays to, you know, drama, migration with issues of course, of belonging, of diaspora, as we usually say, you know, in classrooms, we talk about African diaspora and about the Black Atlantic. And it's always very revealing. It's been very revealing for us to read your texts because they tell us about how this social phenomena, historical processes of migration, which are very specifically detailed, are also part of our individual lives, how they affect, you know, individual lives. And I think in this text that you read for us, a metaphor really comes clear. Home. Home. It's always been an underlining theme in all your texts, but I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, that for the first time the word home appears in one of your titles, right? It's home. And we all, you know, have an idea of what home is. And what you said at the beginning and what you've been, you know, expressing throughout your text is that home, we all think, you know, we're in Italy. It's true all over the world, but in Italy, this word has particular resonances. Home is connected to family, right? And this is a family narrative that you're sharing with us today. So my question, you know, after like sharing this train of thought, this is the first time that I heard this, you know, piece of literature. So I'm thinking aloud with you all. My first question would be, we all know how, also because, you know, you taught us how imagination, fiction can fill, you know, historical gaps, histories gaps, narratives that we do not receive, that we are not necessarily exposed to, that are usually marginalized. But family narratives, you know, how much can they fill gaps of the secrets that, you know, affect everybody's life? You know, we all know that families never tell us the truth, or the truth that we want to hear about, you know, our genealogy, our roots, our family, our home. So is it possible to fill these gaps with writing, with, you know, literature, with art? Or do we have perhaps to accept that there is an impossibility, a real impossibility of telling these stories? Does it make sense?
This working? Okay. Well, I think I said near the beginning that yeah, okay, thank you. The meeting was a failure in the sense that I didn't get the answers I was looking for, but it was not a failure in the sense that it led to more questions. it led to more questions, it led to more self-reflection. So I don't think that, my favorite definition of writing has always been, it's a process of fumbling in the dark, because this is not my quote. This is a quote from an American writer called Grace Paley. And she said, I write about what I don't know about what I know. I don't write about what I know, because if I know it, I'm not going to write. I write about what I don't know, but it has to be in an area that I feel I have some knowledge. So I have something to write about when a conversation fails, because I still don't know. And I think that's the same with, I mean, you were making the correct comment, I think, there, Alexandra, about the larger social and political questions. We don't know the answers to why the United States is in the situation it's in at the moment. We don't know why the Second World War happened. There's lots of things we don't know. We can investigate, but the fact that people are still going to write history books, people are still going to make films, people are still going to write fiction about these subjects, it's because we don't know. It's the same with families. We can't expect to get definitive answers to these difficult questions, but because we don't know, is a spur to continue. So the failure is actually righteous. I have no problem with not knowing, because the questions are more important than the answers.
I agree. Questions are very important. We all agree. Questions are very important. And I'm not sure that they are more important than answers, but the question here is, Maria Renata, where is she? We don't have the answer, but we will have in a few minutes. And there's going to be a temporary answer because she might disappear again. But genealogy and invention. Oh, here she is. She is here. Okay. Genealogy and invention are two words that, in a way, in this piece, come together. And we always think of them as two opposites. Like family genealogy and nation genealogy. There is a lot of discourse today about genealogy and the formation of nations. But of course, it's also something that has got to do with family, with, tribes. To mention one of your first books that some of them have read, The European Tribe. On the other hand, the power of invention is very strong, and learning, knowledge has got to do with all of this. So let me move to the personal. How well do you think that we know our parents, and how well do you think we should know our parents and our children? Does it really help to understand better our life? Does it really help to sail through this world, especially today with everything happening in the world? What are your temporary answers about that issue?
Well, it's a story. I mean, your parents' lives are a story that they have told you some part of the story, but they've not told you the whole story. You will always go on discovering things after they've gone about their lives that you never knew. It might be a photograph that you come across, a letter, a postcard that you find. So it's an incomplete story. So you should never look for finality. You should never look for a complete master narrative that is not subject to scrutiny. You're looking for as much of the story as you can find. And why do you want the story? Well, you want the story because it helps you on your journey. You don't want the story because you're nosy and you're just investigating out of idle curiosity. You want the story so it can help you navigate your own way through your life. the difficulties that you will face, the problems that you will face. Perhaps the solution to some of those problems can be found by looking at the lives of your parents. You know, it is an old cliche, but it is true. You know, we learn from history. Sadly, as human beings, we learn nothing from history because we keep making the same stupid mistakes over and over again. But in theory, we learn from history. If we examine the past, it will give us some idea of how we might better behave in the present and in the future. But that's why I'm interested in the past, because I mean, it helps me know where I am. And if I know where I am, I have some idea of where I might go. Without that basic connection, past, present, future, we're lost. So you have to stitch the past to the present. And if you don't know where you are, you have no idea where you're going. So they have to be stitched together. Past, present, and future are triplets. They are siblings. They live together. So looking for the past is very important, but you don't, you know, it's the beginning of a journey looking for the past, not the conclusion.
Thank you. Speaking of journeys, I want to refer to your latest novel, to your most recent novel. It's not there anymore, but it's here. You know,
Okay.
Another Man in the Street, which was published a couple of years ago, and last year, 25, 20.
Time moves fast.
Yes, last year, and actually, we read, some of us, you know, we're involved, you know, in this reading and committed to this reading, and there is a journey, another journey. Your novels, but also your non-fictional books, are kind of marked by several journeys in different directions in different parts of the world. This is a journey that struck me in a way because it seems to me that although it's a fictional story, although, you know, in your fiction there is always some historical reference. This is, as most of you know, a story set in the 60s in England, and it opens with a scene on the ocean. Okay, so there is this young man who's leaving the Caribbean to go to England to look for a better future. This is also a topic that resonates a lot today with Italy. But you know, every fragment, every section, every chapter of history is different from any other chapter of history. But in any case, we can in a way relate to that. What I found in my memory reading this novel is that it's kind of another side of the story of your first novel, The Final Passage, The Final Passage. And my question is, what's changed in your writing, in your interest, in your commitment as a writer from then, 40 years later, because that's a novel that dates back to 1985.
Yeah. Honestly, nothing has changed, you know. And when I was the age of the majority of people in this room, when I was a student at university, and about to leave, so around about April, May, when I was in my final year at university, I had one ambition, which was to not get a job. You know, I didn't want to work because I wanted to write. And I knew if I left university and got a job, that I would probably not write because unfortunately, I was trained to be quite disciplined. So I wasn't going to just get a job and then blow it off. So I knew that I had to, I knew I wanted to write, but I knew I had to create the space to write. The big problem is money, you know, because I didn't have any money. How was I going to be able to afford to create the space? I told my mother that I wanted to be a writer. She went batshit crazy. She said, "What the hell are you doing? I didn't bring you across the Atlantic to England for you to throw away your education on this stupidness." You know, she wanted me to be something sensible, like her. She was a teacher, or a lawyer, or a doctor, or something respectable. And we had the worst argument we ever had when I was 21 with her just before I left university. And I dug my heels in and I said, no, I'm going to leave. And I did leave and I didn't get a job. And I was a bum for a while trying to write. In those days, you could claim social welfare, unemployment benefit. So I went on unemployment benefit until we had this witch in England called Mrs. Thatcher who closed that loophole down. But you know, for the best part of a year, I was living off my then girlfriend and the state. She was very forgiving. Maybe not so much now, but I didn't want to have a job, and all my friends were leaving college and they were getting cars, apartments, they had money. So the reason I say nothing has changed is what made me want to do that? What made me want to turn my life upside down like that? And it's the same thing today. I had something to say. I had something to say then, and I have something to say now still. As soon as I have nothing to say, trust me, I will stop writing. Because the impulse is that you have something to say. Sounds very simple, but trust me, a lot of people write books who have nothing to say. A lot. Some of them are taught. So people have ideas. Ideas, not a book. Some of them should just stay as ideas. A book is something different. So I had something to say that went beyond an idea for a book. When I wrote The Final Passage, I had something to say, and when I wrote the novel that you kindly referred to, I had something to say. It's the same thing. Exactly, it's the same thing all the way.
Of course, the question that comes to my mind would be, so what is a book? What is a novel?
A book is an idea which has been refined, if it's a novel, through an empathetic engagement with character and a serious engagement with language. That's a book.
That's a wonderful definition, and I think it also, you know, warms our hearts because we're here, we are readers. And before opening the floor to them, I have a very final question, which is a bit more general.
Yeah.
Can really reading help us understand where we want to go better? We meaning we young people. Yes, exactly. And
reading is the only hope we have left. Reading is the most important activity you can ever engage in. In a world which is becoming increasingly stupid and increasingly narcissistic and increasingly self-serving, in a world of reality TV, mobile phones, social media, we're being taught, and we have a generation that is being taught that the most important person in the world is themselves. And that is very, very, very dangerous. Reading teaches empathy and it teaches respect for people who are not you. When I'm writing a book, I'm trying to imagine the lives of people that are not me. And when you're reading a book, you are doing exactly the same. You are stepping beyond the citadel of self and you are trying to understand other people. Ask yourself this question, Alessandra. Do you think Donald Trump has ever read a book?
I think the answer comes from them.
Right. Read, and then read more,
Mhm.
and then read more again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Maria Renata. Okay. Do you want to say something or shall we? Okay. So exactly. We know that there are some questions and so we want to open the floor. 3 questions. There's no time to be shy here. So who's ready? I can pass the microphone. I'll come.
So you said you write a book when you want something to say. So what did you want it to say? Is it struggle in your mind or is it some complaints? What is it? You want to clarify?
I know I have something to say, but I don't know what it is. I mean, the reason why universities are important and why criticism is important and feedback is important is there are people who will tell me what I have to say. I can't deconstruct myself. I know I have something to say. What my message might be is not up to me to actually say that. That's the role of criticism. That's the role of feedback. And that's why although I don't read reviews and I don't read interviews, I respect the fact that there are people out there taking work seriously. An art form can never be an art form unless there's feedback, serious feedback. Film is a serious art form because people write seriously about film. Visual art is serious because people write serious. Television is not an art form because nobody writes seriously about television. Literature is an art form. People write about it. So I don't think it's up to me to know exactly what I'm doing or to have a message. I know you're not asking me to be as reductive as that, but I know I have something to say without being able to reduce it to a sentence or 2 sentences. If I could make it shorter than 250 pages, then I would, but I can't. But there are people who can do that and who respect the work of creative people enough to want to engage with it purposefully and then pass that knowledge on to their students. And that baton passing between the writer and the university, between the writer and the teacher is very important. But I'm not going to pretend to do their job.
There's another question there. Yes.
Has your definition of imagination changed?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, I think like a lot of children have very fertile imaginations. Children have the great ability to dream, to think, to invent that slowly with time can go away, can disappear as you get older. I just happen to have lived most of my childhood for reasons that are, partly hinted at in what I read. I just happen to have had to live a lot of my life in my imagination because I didn't have any cogent answers to the question of who am I? But that richness of living in one's imagination is something which I still do. I mean, I still feel that dreaming things up, conjuring imaginary characters out of midair, which is, again, as I said, something that children are very good at doing. I still feel that that's something that is the best way for me to communicate, or it's the best way for me to sit in judgment on myself, is to imagine.
Hi, hello. Thank you for being here. We're here. I actually have two questions. I will start with the first one. Is there a point where the search for a home becomes less about recovery and more about accepting displacement as permanent? This is the first one. And the second one is, do you think your readers tend to seek answers in your work? And if so, how do you respond to that expectation? Thank you.
The second question, I don't consider myself as having any work, because once I finish a book, it's nothing to do with me. It belongs totally to the reader. So what the reader thinks of the book, be it, I hate this rubbish, I can't finish it, to I love it, is none of my business, because it's the reader's book. When nobody ever grows up. I certainly, when I was 20, 21 at university, as I was telling you, and decided I wanted to write, nobody ever says, and I didn't say to myself then, I want to be an author. I wanted to be a writer. But once I've written, then I'm an author. And this is nothing to do with me. This is the author is, but when I'm writing the book, it is all to do with me. It's nothing to do with anybody else. So there's a very clear distinction for me. So I feel I wanted to be a writer. I didn't want to be an author. So people's feedback about work, I haven't read a review of a book of mine since 1987, okay, or an interview. The nice journalist who gave me this outside with, he doesn't know, but I'm not going to read it. And not just because I can't speak Italian. I don't read anything. I'm grateful that the space is there, and I'm grateful that the publisher wanted, and I'm even more grateful that anybody wants to read. But nothing to do with me what the reader thinks. What was the first question? I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Well, I think, the world, the best way I can answer that is to say, I grew up in the north of England, in Yorkshire, where very much like Italy, family is very central. Everybody had their grandparents and their aunts and their uncles and their cousins. And I was an immigrant. I had nothing. I had my mother, father, divorced. I knew nothing about, I never met my grandparents. So I felt deprived. I felt that displacement that came with migration was a loss. I felt undernourished in the family way. But more and more I look around the world now, I see that condition is not so unique. It felt unique when I was a boy, 30 years ago, oh, give or take. I thought it was a problem. I don't think it's a problem, a unique problem anymore. It seems that that notion of migration, displacement, searching for home, crossing water, beginning again, reinventing oneself, it has become an early 21st century narrative that goes beyond the colonial, that goes beyond the economic, that goes beyond the political. You know, the makeup of the world, the makeup of the, what can I tell you? I mean, I'm a little bit obsessed with sport. Look at the, you know, we have in Leeds, we have a black player who's Italian. You know, look at the Dutch team, look at the English team. You often find the clue to what's happening in a society by looking at sport as a lens through which to look at the Italian track and field team. It's not as uncommon as it was. I was a student at university when the first black footballer played for England. You would have thought that it was bigger news than a man landing on the moon. But it's not news anymore.
Don't talk about the decay of Italian soccer, you know. There is another important.
Good afternoon. In the introduction, I'm here. In the introduction to your collection of essays, A New World Order, you repeatedly state, I recognize the place, I feel at home here, but I don't belong. I am of and not of this place. 25 years have passed since the collection was published. How do you feel about this today? How has your way of thinking changed over time?
No, I think I feel the same way. You know, lots of places I go to that my relationship with the place is feeling both of it and not of it. You know, it's the same with, you know, the three passports that I have in my bag. You know, British passport, American passport, St. Kitts passport. I don't feel completely at home in any of those countries. I certainly don't feel at home in the United States. I feel at home in New York, but New York is not the United States of America. New York has nothing to do with the United States of America. So the same ambivalence that I, you know, was banging on about back then, I still feel that. Maybe the difference is, to answer your good question a little more directly, is I'm not looking to belong anywhere. I'm not searching for any kind of rootedness or any kind of home. I'm quite happy with the ambivalence. I'm quite happy with the in-between state because of partly what I was saying to the lady at the back there. It's now a much more common condition for people to fuse languages, cultures in one body. It's much more common for countries, often reluctantly, to accept their multiracial, multilingual, multicultural reality. I mean, obviously, some countries are resisting that still, but it's much more common. So I think some of the anxiety that may have been informing what I wrote back then has lessened. It might also just be that I'm an old geezer and I keep, you know, just think, you know, what's the point? You know, I think it's okay to belong to more than one place. I think it's okay to feel slightly out of tune because I think there's a certain freedom that comes with that too. You know, I don't feel obligated. When I land at Heathrow, I don't think, oh, thank God I'm back in Keir Starmer's England. But at the same time, I don't think, I don't want to be here. You know, it's just what it is.
Thank you.
I would just want to say one more thing. I also don't really have a proper job. So if I had a proper job, I think the sense of rootedness that would come with that job would be important and would probably ground me. But I'm like a lot of creative people, I'm always zipping around places. So I think it's slightly different if you have a career that you have to build within a national framework or within a particular city even. But you know, as you obviously know, I've lived in Britain and I've lived in the Caribbean and I've lived in Sweden and I've lived in Barbados and I've lived in the United States. So I don't really have an anchor in any place. When my mother died, she left me very clear instructions. Under no circumstances bury me in England. So we had to take her ashes back to St. Kitts, to the churchyard where in the village where she was born. And my brother put on the tombstone, finally home. And that's what she wanted. But you know, yeah, I'm not sure I feel the same instinct that I'm her son. I'm not sure I feel that same thing. I kind of do feel, please, not England, but I don't know where.
Plus, you already gave instructions about that.
I have, yeah, I have, and I still,
Public instruction.
I have, yes, and I expect you to carry them out, Alexandra.
Hi.
Question.
Yes.
I'm here. If you could sit down and have a conversation with one of your characters, who would it be and what would you ask them?
All right. You probably think I'm saying this to get out of answering your question, but I actually consciously try to forget the books once I've written them. I try to forget the names of the characters, who they are, because I have to make room in my head for new people. I can't carry all these people around because I'd be crazy, because I'd have all these people and their life stories and their voices. So just in terms of just thinking, you know, just from this book, this last book, there are actually 3 journeys in this book. There's a journey of a guy who comes from the Caribbean to England. There's a journey of a young woman who goes from the north of England to London during the 60s, when a lot of working class people left. You know, internal migration happens in all countries, you know, leave one part to go to a more affluent part of the country. And so she left as a young woman, the north of England, to come to London, which is a journey of migration. And then there's a Polish man who leaves, a Jewish Polish man who leaves war-ravaged Poland to escape the worst aspects of the Holocaust and comes to England. He's the guy I want to talk to.
Okay. So I feel most of the feelings of displacement you talked about as a secondary school teacher, but as a person whose family members had to move elsewhere all around Italy to find a job. So I feel in tune with this feeling of being in between all the time, okay? And as a secondary school teacher, as I was saying, you reminded us of the importance of reading stories, okay? To empathize with people through the characters, okay? The question is, do you think have attitudes towards outsiders, for example, changed in Britain or in Europe, in Italy, for example, since you wrote the first book?
Sorry.
Have attitudes towards outsiders, people who come from other people who have the same stories of displacement, of migration, for example, have changed over time since you wrote the first
Yeah.
book?
Well, all outsiders are me. Every outsider, anybody who considers themselves to be outside or to be looked upon and judged, whether it's because of their religion or whether it's because of their gender or whether it's because of the color of their skin or whether it's because their sexuality, because they're gay, they're they're all me. So I have empathy with the other. You know, that's I have to have empathy with the other because I am the other. I've never been not the other. Every room I walk into, I'm the other. So they're my pals. You know, I want to know who they are, and I want to know their story, and I want to make them feel better about themselves. So that hasn't changed, and I still feel when I look around the world, when I open my newspaper, thank God there's a newspaper and not a screen, but when I open my newspaper or I still read about people who are determined to make the other ashamed of themselves or determined to reduce people because of their religion or their sexuality or their gender or the color of their skin. And as long as people are doing that, then I have a job. You know, when people stop doing that, then maybe the characters that I imagine and want to engage with will stop speaking to me and asking me to tell their stories. But as long as they're speaking to me, and as long as they trust me with their stories, then I have a job. That's my job, is to imagine myself into the lives of people who are not me, and try to share that with the readers so that they understand the lives of people who are not them.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions by the panel? Okay, final two questions. How about that?
Final two?
I've got nowhere to be.
Two more questions and then we're all like ready to go for
Ready to go for lunch, and we got time tomorrow for other.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay, sorry. I keep looking. The reason I do that is I can't physically locate sounds because I'm deaf in one ear. So I literally can't, I can't immediately locate it. So
Since you have often emphasized the importance of how a story is narrated, how it is told, how do you is when a sentence has reached its final form, and how do you between true precision and the risk of overworking a sentence, and to the point where it loses its final authenticity?
that's a great question. It's a terrific question. I have finished this essay, but it is covered in my changes, okay, that I made this morning to sentences, changing an adjective, changing an adverb. The truth is, you never finish a book. You never finish a book. You abandon it. You abandon it because there's no and you will experience this with an essay that you write or anything. If you look at it again, a week later, you will see something you can change. So you judiciously abandon it. You find the moment when you have to let it go. Otherwise, you can be revising forever. And it's one of the great lessons that I have to try to get into the head of students, which is let it go. Just let it go, because you will improve it next week and you'll improve it a week later. But there has to be a point when you judiciously abandon it because you've taken it to that place. My criteria for that personally is this. When I find myself putting punctuation back into something that I took the punctuation out of yesterday, after that lies madness. So once a comma was taken out on Tuesday and I put it back in Wednesday, I think, no, done. But as long as I'm still changing sentences and still changing adjectives and adverbs, I've still got a little bit of work to do. It's the punctuation that I finally decide, you know what, stop this.
So in Color Me English, you highlight the importance of the writer and in literature in, for example, giving voice to different stories, different experiences. Nowadays, we live in a world where there are, thanks to social media, everyone can share his voice and their own experiences. So how the role of the writer has changed in present day, in the present world?
Well, honestly, I don't think the role of what's changed is publishing. I think the role of the writer is the same. I mean, it's part of the answer I gave to somebody else. It's to try to dignify language. It's to try to empathetically imagine oneself, if you're writing fiction, into character. What's changed is publishing, because that's the strand of literature that sells the least and that publishers are the least interested in. What they're interested in is thrillers, romance, memoir, biography. The area that sells the least and is the least importance to publishers, and increasingly unimportant, is literary fiction. So what's changed is it will become more difficult for young people to write and publish and make a living writing literary fiction. It will become more difficult to do. It already has become more difficult. It's changed. All art forms evolve. So I don't want to be the old geezer saying it's not as good as it used to be when I was a lad. At some point, there's a guy in the middle of the 1620s who loved Shakespeare, went to see all of the plays at the Globe, thought they were great, and wrote a verse play. And somebody said, no, we don't do verse plays anymore. Because we don't do verse plays. At some point, art evolves and changes. So we all have to evolve and change. Luckily, I'm a man with a great future behind me. So I don't have to do too much evolution because, I'm near the end of my life as a writer. But if I was sitting here as a 22-year-old, I don't think I would have the same career, because it would be very difficult to have published literary fiction in the way that I've done, because for anybody, so, I may have had to get a proper job,
Thanks again, Carl. Thanks to all the students here, spellbound first by CARYL Phillips reading and then